Okay. Hi guys, welcome to my exhibition. So with this exhibition, Just Being, which ended up being a true melding of every aspect of my work, in which I've sought to create a blend of performance and the object, das Ding, the thing. I wanted to go back to one of the most important aspects of my work and to go back to words I wrote while still in graduate school at UC Davis, studying under Lynn Hirschman, Wayne Thiebaud, and Fred Wilson, and to show how my practice can be seen to reflect my own ideals, and that adamantly includes a point of view deeply influenced by gender studies, queer theory, and feminism. I was surprised to find that when I went to connect my theoretical, plastic, and performative artistic practices together, that something incredible and unexpected happened. My world shifted. My ideas and my ideals became more focused, clearer, and sharper than they had been ever before. As a writer, artist, and performance artist of color, I can't help but think of the idea of the borderland, certainly of the borderland identity. The kind of identity that Guillermo Gomez Peña invokes in his performances is more likely to read to people like me to read as true to us people of colors, as I like to refer to this. Because we are all many colors, we who grew up drinking out of tazas and sleeping on the sala in front of reruns of Archie Bunker, as our mothers warned us that it is important to know our enemies. And all the while, all we could think was how much that duet piano theme song sounded and felt just like home. We are, of course, in fact, not only made up of borders, we are the borderlands. We who grew up without a single unitary identification, a simply defined identity. And because of this, we do not suffer the great shock and loss of this particular bugaboo, of this decentering postmodern bugaboo. I am not just speaking of people of color here. Rather, every one of us is a mixture of cultures, identities, and ideologies. The era of essentialized identity is over, and it is now time for an infinitude of alliances and complex, intermingled, intertangled identities. What I'm saying is that those like me re-exist, write, and theorize from a position that has already always been postmodern, post-identity, post-singularity, and post-singularity. We know inherently what it means to walk through and among several spaces at the same time. We know what it means to wear many contradictory masks, to speak many accents and languages. We do not recreate the hegemonic desire to reconstitute identity, excuse me, because it is not and never was part of our history. It was never part of our story. We do not call for society to attempt to create a space of modernity, to lie to ourselves so that we can move on. Instead, we claim a new, shifting, non-binary, gender-complex, mobile space of many, even antagonistic identities, which we deploy when needed. Trust me when I say that the future will engender a new kind of multiculturalism. We will not be manipulated by those that cry cultural appropriation and cultural purity. Instead, we will celebrate diversity, interdisciplinarity, and shared overlapping identities. Commemorating the differences that come from individual lives lived to the fullest, each of us engendering a multiplicity of identities, individual and shared. And I'm scrolling way past where I wanted to. With the knowledge that no one is lessened by celebrating difference, creating space in which no one is other, because we have seen through current ploys that to divide us, draped in the sheep's clothing of a language that we have been speaking for too long, one which the enemy has learned to use against us. We are instead reclaiming something that we have already always known, something that was never shocked to our multinational, multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-vocal selves. We are all very different, just as we are all the same. And we will celebrate it all. Individual lives of color matter. That is to say, every moment, every dream, every hope, and failure of every individual life lived in color matters. I do not suppose that if you were told, I do suppose that if you were told for millennia that your identity was fixed, that history was fixed, that you could drop your life into a construct made out of generation upon generation of others who looked exactly like you, where civilization was coursing in a predictably positive way, whereupon each generation could applaud itself and ignore the bumps, fissures, and massacres of others that did not finish your cozy, neat narrative, which only included lives that you could pronounce, and names that you could pronounce, name and claim. That this loss would be pretty startling. But it is not, cannot be, if you never had those expectations in the first place. We are instead reclaiming something that we have already always known, something that was never shocked to our multinational, multi-ethnic, multi-racial selves. As I have said before, we were all very different, just as we are all the same. And we must celebrate both of these truths. As a poet, Fred once told me, quoting Bukowski's Women, I believe I stood stark ravingly sane. In the last years, where I lost my mother and my entire world changed, I have been reminded just how meaningless object-making, theorization, and talk can be without hands-on, real, effective practice. The Latinx Performance Art Festivals, which we're actually celebrating a 1-year anniversary of right now, reconnecting with the co-creator of Puto, and many other significant events in my life have made it clear to me that I was much more than a student. I was an artist, writer, and performer. But most importantly, and perhaps patently feminist, I am a practitioner. I realized then, as I do now, that neither my work nor my theory is abstracted or cold and calculated. Rather, I create and perform my ideals for those around me to experience. Back in graduate school, I had taken several feminist courses, one of which was ironically called Masculinities. This was a time in which I had recognized my inherent connections to feminism, queer studies, and gender studies. I had stated in the past that I did not feel alien to the tendencies and practices of feminism, that I did not feel as though they are not about me. Perhaps this was queer. It certainly seemed anti-masculinist, both of which I stand by and stood by proudly. It seemed as though issues of race, identity, and gender all began as feminist issues. If one is honest, she will know that none of the spaces that we recognize now, none of the voices that we hear now, could be recognized without feminism. One of the most important achievements of feminism has been to open up spaces and allow those that had not been able to speak to hear their own voices and to share their dialogue with others. Feminism has always spoken of a history of silence, the silence of voices, and finally the reclaiming of those voices by taking words and feelings and making them into artwork. Something tangible and beautiful stands as a model to be formed. The ability to speak and to be heard is something which all of us, me as a proto-queer little boy, me as a young Hispanic male, me as a comic book fan and victim of the 80s, me as a melancholy lover of sad poems and British television, owes to feminism. The ability to share the pride, even the most unique aspects of myself. Feminism has opened up the queer spaces, and like the speculum that Haraway theorizes in her work, it allows us to look inside and see the blossoming complexities within each of us. Every identity movement that owes its existence. Every identity movement that has come after owes its existence to feminism. For me, even back in the 90s and early 20th century, one of the most important groups of theorists were those dealing with the expansion of gender, especially those that championed the idea that gender is performed and performative. This became a large basis for much of my writing, sculpture, and performance work. These authors postulated that gender is both created and cultivated, and most important, they promoted how gender can be used as a space for resistance. Authors like Haraway, Butler, Wilson, and Silverman have further opened masculinity to a set of critiques that are to me of utmost importance. What I'm saying is that those like me, we exist, write, and theorize from a position that has always already been postmodern, post-identity, post-singularity. them short so that it's not so long. Through performance, I have always sought to engender, actually, let's read that. This body of work, especially the just being pieces, like the one that's there is just me sleeping. This body of work is perhaps the most important, and yet it is definitely the most reductive and least exciting work I've ever done. Or is it? Originally entitled Just Being, then Just Being Latinx, and ultimately Radical Presence, Just Being Latinx. It is a series of unaltered documentary recorded moments, scenes of me just sitting, or making a cup of coffee, or frying an egg. They investigate and deconstruct the idea that artists of color must be made. Art that by artists of color must be made for a reason. That it must jump through programmatic hoops, defined by the expectations of others, or more precisely, those that other. That it must be somehow revolutionary, that it must be reactive, and about being a person of color. This art series is about just being, and it is sufficient. Though in a term laden with irony, merely existing may end up being the most revolutionary of acts, deconstructing and ultimately reifying the very idea that contemporary Latin art deserves to exist, to be here at all, and that we have the right and duty to tell our own individual stories. Without comedy, without irony, without pandering or focusing our performance to the hegemonic gaze, even as outside forces try to take that all away and turn the idea of individual being against us by telling us that it is selfish and we have nothing new to say anyway. Ideas steeped in the history of desire to control our behavior. Through performance, I have always sought to engender, enlarge, and expand the conversation of what Latino, Latinx, Latina, and Latino art is, and what it must be. And in Just Being, I investigate the idea of the radical action of radically just being a person of color, and just presenting your life, not as a revolutionary act, not as a generalized act, but just being, as it is. In other words, if you learn nothing else from me, learn this. To thine own self be true. Thank you. So do you have any questions about this and like how perhaps the sculpture fits in with any of that? Because it seems like big ideas and then you make these little objects, these little petite objects, and you try to figure out, what part of that actually reads. Anyway, go ahead.
So this show seems to me, it's so Americana.
Yeah.
It's like American boy childhood.
Yes.
I.G.I. Joe dolls, Invisible Men.
Yeah.
And then the boat in front of it's sort of tongue-in-cheek Americana, this little house with the TV inside of it. How does that Americana relate to the identity that you just were talking about?
Let's go back to something that was like this big revelation for me. So when you're a child, and there used to be this TV series, I'm a little bit older than probably a lot of you guys. There was a show called The Banana Splits. And what it was like cartoons and these guys dressed up in costumes and stuff. And
The Banana Splits?
The Banana Splits. La 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 la.
Was it PBS?
I think it was like ABC. It was, I'll show you after the show.
School Saturday morning?
It was after school, about 3 o'clock, and it was a combination of shorts with these people dressed up in costumes, which they would do like stupid things like drive around in like those Jeeps that G.I. Joes had, the ones with the big wheels, or sing and run into each other and fall on the floor and all that stuff. And then there were cartoons in between. There was like the Three Musketeers, Adam Ants, a bunch of different things. But I thought that it was just all for me. I internalized it in such a way that it meant all the world to me. these things, and so it surprised me later on when there were like TV shows in the 80s or channels. They started doing those channels in the 80s, like Boomerang. And Boomerang started airing the banana splits. And I was like, wait a sec, you mean other people know about this? This wasn't just my childhood and like this personalized. So there's this bizarre thing that happens with, like you were saying, like objects, that like the Fisher Price toy. And the G.I. Joe, in fact. They do this thing where they help you navigate the universe. They're like, there was a word for it, I forget. But like especially G.I. Joes, they're toys, but they're also ways for the initial psyche of a small child to sort of like socialize and experiment with their world and experience their world. And but probably because of the way the identity is formulated and Maslow's, not Maslow's, but the steps that we go through for evolving,
right.
Like
hierarchies.
We are originally not Maslow, but I forget what they're called. But initially, we're very, very I-centered, and so we think the world revolves around the things that we love, and I think that has a lot to do with why there is so much, say, Americana, but at the same time, it's not about it being American. It's about it being, in some ways, finding a way to communicate my biography in a way that is more universal for everyone else. Without, like we were talking about, so with the Just Being series, when I lived in Europe, I realized race became very deconstructed for me living here. That a lot of the things that I don't know if I want this out on this, so we'll talk about that at some other time, because it's a bigger issue. But I don't see race and identity as a simple thing. I see it as a complex set of powers and strengths that in some ways are ultimately unique. But in other ways,
we're moving beyond identity.
What's that?
You suggested we're moving beyond identity. In the beginning of your talk, you suggested we're entering a phase where
I think, okay, so
would that be true for a transgender person, or people in the future who have new identities and new understandings of gender? Won't identity always be an important resource for artists involved?
I don't think I said that we're moving beyond identity. I think I said we're moving beyond a simple idea, essentialized ideas of identity. Because I think identity is actually what we're moving towards. And part of the show is a claiming of identity. It's a claiming of an individual's life in the face of forces that want to essentialize and simplify identity and marginalize and other ideas of identity. So no, I don't believe that, and hopefully I've never said this, that we're moving beyond identity. I think we're moving beyond a simple set of ideas of identity.
Could you, two questions. One, could you explain your intention with all the ropes and its relevance to Just Being?
Yes.
And then I want to inquire your perception of the presence of power and its association with identity, or lack of identity.
That is so big, I'm not even sure where I would start with that. I'm not that smart. So something like the idea of power and identity was like, that might be beyond me. I'm not sure. But in terms of this performance, I wanted to create a connection between all of the work in the space and myself, kind of almost like a central locus of the work. And in some ways, it's like the piece in the back that says I and me over and over again. It's about claiming positionality and claiming a central space with the work. So for me, that's where it came from. It came from the idea of being, at least for this show, being the central idea that it all comes out of. And it has, there are different looks and different, ideas in it, but that when it comes down to it, it's the I and the me of the show.
Cool.
Any questions about any specific pieces or anything, or?
Maybe a question about the earlier ghost work. Your performance art is known for the figure of the ghost.
Uh-huh.
A series of your works have the cloth draped over you. Could you talk a little bit about the ghost in terms of your work and how it is represented here in this show?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So the ghost is actually one of the earliest icons in my work. I guess before that there was a character called the Dum Dum Boy, and he was. I went through a period where I was really worried that I was dyslexic. I almost didn't go to grad school because I did so poorly in my math, and then basically had to. And I found out that essentially with that math is taught in a way that is not good for a dyslexic person or me or an artist and so I had to basically teach myself algebra and trigonometry in 3 months, enough to be able to pass a test, or else I wasn't going to go to grad school. But anyway, so that's why I thought I was the Dum Dum Boy. But the ghost was the second piece. It started with a piece that I did in which I was in a car accident and I lost a dear friend in the car accident with the driver of the car. And I did a piece where I was on a gurney, telling stories, not ghost stories, but stories where I intersected with death. And there's like a lot of them actually that that I guess you collect different aspects, and like I collect people dying around me. But so it sort of started the whole ghost thing with a death piece, as if I had died in a car accident that had just happened. And so after that, I was like, well, you died. So now let's do some pieces with ghosts. And I was really attracted to the sheet ghost because it is such a iconic thing. And I felt like you could say so much with it. You could tell stories of loneliness. You could tell stories of isolation. Originally, the whole ghost series started with me and my brother and sister. We had gone to the ballet, and my parents were late, and we started telling stories, and we told ghost stories, and we sang to each other to fill the time, which probably was only like an hour or so, but it felt like forever, and we felt like we had been abandoned. And so there's a sense of abandonment in a lot of the ghost work that I do. Like this one right here that's playing right now, you can sort of see that he's standing there isolated and alone. And there's like a real sense, there's usually not a lot of ghosts together in my work. Mostly they're alienated and isolated and somehow lacking and somehow in pain. So there's a lot of that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you so much, and thank you for coming, and thank you for being part of the performance, and you guys are awesome.
That's right.
think the shirt you're wearing right now.
The with the